43s. From April the 1st next year, the 59p hourly boost will mean a full-time worker on the living wage will get a pay rise of over £1,000 a year. It's come as £5.9 billion will also be made available in the budget to help tackle NHS backlogs. Meanwhile, the Health Secretary Sajid Javid says the government is heading towards legislating mandatory COVID vaccines for all NHS staff. A member of the Joint Committee of Vaccination and Immunisation is also urging NHS workers to get double jabbed as a matter of professional pride. Scotland's First Minister says the COP26 Global Climate Conference in Glasgow could be the last opportunity to avert a climate catastrophe. Nicola Sturgeon says Scotland's in a unique position to act as a bridge between gaps in conversation between world leaders. Speaking to children in Downing Street, Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the meeting of goals of COP26 would be very difficult, but I think it can be done.
We need as many people as possible to agree to go to net zero so that they're not producing too much carbon dioxide by the middle of the century. Now, I think it can be done. It's going to be very, very tough, this summit. And I'm very worried because it might go wrong. And we might not get the agreements that we need. And it's touch and go.
52 people have been arrested after Insulate Britain brought London's financial district to a standstill today. Protesters took to the streets of the City of London and Canary Wharf. Injunctions have already been imposed on some protesters after they caused delays on the M25 and other major roads during 5 weeks of action. A spokesperson says they'll continue until the government gives a meaningful statement that they can trust. The ultra-low emission zone is expanding in London from today, now covering a quarter of the capital. Drivers of older petrol or diesel cars will have to pay £12.50 a day to drive into the zone. The Mayor for London, Sadiq Khan, told GBNews the scheme will clean up London's toxic air pollution.
Well, the numbers of Londoners in the ULEZ zone is almost 4 million. That's double the size of Paris, 8 times the size of Manchester, because I think this is an issue where all of Londoners should see the benefits of clean air, not just those lucky to live in central London, as a consequence of our first policy in 2019.
The husband of detained British-Iranian aid worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has gone on hunger strike for the second time in 2 years. Richard Ratcliffe is sleeping outside the Foreign Office in London after his wife lost her latest appeal for freedom. Ms Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been held in jail in Iran since 2016, accused of plotting to topple the government. Their daughter Gabriella played a mock-up game of snakes and ladders outside of Parliament to illustrate the challenges of trying to get her mother home. Richard Ratcliffe says he wants to go back to being a normal family.
Part of what we wanted to do today was just to say, listen, we've all had a lot of ups and downs in our lives, you know. This is a heck of a long time for this to be dragging on. And of course, you know, over time I've been on the television lots and lots and been on, you know, the newspapers lots and lots. And we'd love to go back to being a normal family. And I still have every faith that one day we will.
And Friends actor James Michael Tyler has died aged 59 after being diagnosed with prostate cancer. The actor, who is well known for playing coffee shop manager Gunther, revealed in June that the disease had spread to his bones. He died at his home in Los Angeles. In this archive interview, he said he never knew how big the show was going to be.
Kept my job at the actual coffee shop that I was working at as a real barista in real life the first 4 years that Friends ran. I would shoot maybe 2 or 3 days a week on Friends, and then I kept my shifts at the real coffee shop. So I go in there, and people would walk in and do a double or triple or quadruple take, and often say, "Gunther, what are you doing here?" I'm like, "What would you like? You know, please, can we hurry this thing up? You know, a latte, cappuccino," but it would blow people's minds.
You're right up to date. I'll bring you the latest headlines in half an hour. Now it's back to Piero and Halligan.
Coming up today on Piero and Halligan, we'll be talking about the online safety bill as Facebook's whistleblower gives evidence to MPs.
The former Business Secretary and former Leader of the House of Commons, Andrea Leadsom, joins us to talk about the Treasury's pledge to support parents and children in the early years of their life.
And for this hour's Money Talks interview, I sit down with Gareth Stace, Director of UK Steel, the trade body for an industry that still employs more than 30,000 UK workers. Ahead of Wednesday's budget, we discuss energy prices, the government's net zero targets.
When we move, as we move further to a net zero carbon world in the UK, this country will not be using less steel, it will be using more steel. All the government scenarios of how we're going to get to net zero carbon in 2040 or 2050 all use more steel. Therefore, what should we do?
And it's not just our guests we want to hear from. Join the conversation with your view, whether that's about social media or whether it's about what should be in the budget. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at GBNews.
Now, earlier this month, Facebook, which also owns WhatsApp and Instagram, came under mass scrutiny after former employee Frances Haugen leaked thousands of internal documents highlighting the tech giant's failure to keep harmful content off its platforms.
The data scientist stated in a testimony earlier this month to US senators that Mark Zuckerberg's company puts astronomical profits before people.
Today, whistleblower Frances Haugen will be questioned by MPs and peers looking at the online safety bill, which imposes a duty of care to users after Boris Johnson promised to fast-track the legislation.
The MPs are looking for changes including ID verification and lifetime bans for repeat offenders.
Joining us now is James Bohr, the Director of Bohr's Consultancy Limited, which provides data protection and cyber security guidance. We also have Imran Ahmed, the CEO of the Centre for Counterfeiting Digital Hate. And in the studio, CEO of Blonde Money and friend of the show, wise lady on all things, Helen Thomas, is still with us. James Bohr, let's start with you. Great to see you back on the show. Can we expect fireworks in the House of Commons today?
I think that's pretty much guaranteed.
OK. Imran, if I can come to you, what have we learned that we didn't know from Miss Haugen's testimony about Facebook?
What we've been discovering is that the things that outside bodies, including governments and others, have been asserting for a long time, that these are companies that are creating enormous amounts of harm just through their core business model, the algorithms that power what works and what doesn't on those platforms. But also because they've been allowing bad actors to run rampant on their platform, whether that's foreign governments trying to interfere in elections, or it's anti-vaxxers, or it's people spreading neo-Nazi hatred. That we've seen that's been a serious problem. What she's revealed is that these companies had a core strategy of denying responsibility, deflecting it to someone else, delaying taking action, and then spending oodles of money to deceive legislators, lawmakers in the US, in the UK, all over the world, and civil society. And for the first time, what she's done is really shone a light. She sort of switched on the floodlights inside Facebook, showed us what's going on inside. And she's helped to make that moral argument that it's time not just to regulate these organizations, but to also to have the power of criminal compulsion, so that executives should be held to criminal standards and criminal responsibility where necessary, because frankly, what they've been doing is a massive joint criminal enterprise.
Helen Thomas, strong words there from Imran Ahmed. Obviously, Facebook and the other tech giants would deny a lot of what he's saying there, those allegations. I think what no one can deny is that an awful lot of people who work in government or in public life in general as lawmakers then go and work for the tech giants. You were formerly a special advisor. You know, special advisors we could name here. It wouldn't be fair to do so, but they've gone off and worked for the tech giants. These companies have formidable lobbying power, don't they?
Well, they do. I mean, one of the things about the mega cap tech companies is they're effectively, you know, they are so powerful now. They're actually more powerful than our elected officials. Now, that creates a situation where actually, of course, our elected officials want to push back against that, and in many respects, rightly so. But it also means that those, you know, when you have that huge rise of untrammelled power, you've got to be prepared for it to be challenged. So I think that, in effect, we're hurtling into this inevitable clash between these two powerful, the institutions of government, and then what these companies have created. And your first guest mentioned fireworks. I think it's just the beginning. I mean, this is going to go on and hopefully get to a better position, because clearly, there's great damage being done and issues being raised here. So we need the fireworks to actually get anywhere with this.
James Bohr, if we can come to you now. Oh.
I think James is there, isn't he?
Oh, OK, they're on their way. James, can you hear me?
I can.
Hello. Imran Ahmed suggested it was time for criminal sanctions. What do you think about that as a solution to publishing, misinformation, allowing or enabling online hate?
I wouldn't want to rule it out completely. I think there are complications, there are issues there. If it's something I would be prosecuted for publishing in some form, if I published a book or something similar, then yes, absolutely. If it's not, then it's hard to argue that companies need to be held to a higher degree. I can understand why. We get many of the same discussions and issues around media companies as well. Media companies being liable for content that they publish, which might be incorrect, and it is just a challenging area. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to wade too much into it.
It is a very tough area, isn't it, Imran Ahmed? It strikes me that a lot of the tech giants' defence goes back to that, mid to late 90s Clinton-era legislation, where they somehow managed to convince everybody they weren't publishers, they were just platforms. So media companies like us, who have to be held to account and spend money on real journalism if we want to put stuff out there, these tech giants, they just don't have that restriction, do they? And it strikes me, maybe you agree, that until they are seen as what they are, in my view, which is publishers rather than platforms, we're never going to get anywhere in terms of required regulation.
I mean, I think it's somewhat worse than you state, that the legislation in place in 1996, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, passed under the Clinton administration by Congress, that particular bit of legislation says that, and this was before social media companies existed. So it's not that they lobbied for it, they didn't exist at the time. And since then, there's been no changes at all to that framework legislation, which says that no social media, no online platform can be in any way held liable for any of the content published on their website by a third party. And that is an extraordinary freedom for social media companies to have. It's not even that that if they published something that they might be held liable. There is no way at all of holding them liable for any of the content produced by someone else, even when their algorithms promote certain content. So their decision, for example, to make it more visible, hate, misinformation, which is what Frances Horgan has said. She says the algorithms promote the most contentious, the most hateful. They promote misinformation over good information because it gets people talking. And that's all they care about, is keeping people talking on their platforms where they can serve them ads. 98% of Facebook's revenues come from advertising. And that's why they've created this perpetual emotion, anger machine that is eventually making our entire society more brittle. And they can be held liable for not one word of any of that. And it's incredible, really. It's time now for us to have legislation. I mean, we're not even asking for legislation that would reach the standards that newspapers or that book publishers or that authors are held to. We're asking for legislation that still allows the growth of this really important industry, one that's created an enormous amount of wealth throughout society. Think about all the small businesses that rely upon the ability to advertise cheaply to people. That's a good thing.
think about the ways in which we stay in connection with each other. That's a good thing. But then consider all the harms that are created as well, and they cannot be held liable for any of it. And where they fail to take action against foreseeable harms, and where, in the online safety bill, these are identified as being social harms that are so serious that we say you must take action to try and minimize those harms. If they continually fail to do so, it is time for the final backstop to be able to say, look, you're really, really taking the mickey now. I'm afraid there's going to be a criminal charge to go with it.
Helen, the Facebook whistleblower said that Facebook prioritised growth over users' safety. Private company needs to make money. Is that a surprise to anyone?
I don't think it is a surprise, no. And of course, growth and it's all about eyeballs, isn't it? I mean, this is what you guys are trying to do with your show, which is we're getting your eyeballs and giving you something to really think about, the facts, rather than, let's say, more speculative comments that happen. One thing, actually, I would just want to mention, it's something every morning we write, our business writes an email. And
very good.
Thank you very much. And but we do an On This Day. On this day in 1924, there's something called the Zinoviev letter was published in the Daily Mail. Yeah. And this was supposed to be from this general of the Communist International in Moscow, Zinoviev, arguing that the Communist Party in Great Britain should engage in seditious activities. It was just before the election. It was a frightener, which eventually potentially contributed to a Conservative landslide. But what I want to get at with that is we've always been faced by propaganda and fake news. But what the social media companies have to be aware of is their global reach and how many people they now reach, and their algorithm. It's not just a front page of a newspaper in the morning, which had an impact in 1924. Now it's everybody's eyeballs everywhere.
And as Imran said, we're regulated by Ofcom, yeah? The Zinoviev letter was fake, and in the end, newspapers were sanctioned for that. But Facebook and the rest of them aren't sanctioned.
Yes, well, and this is it, isn't it? When new technology comes out, it's about the regulations, because, as you mentioned there, Gloria, capitalism, private companies operate within the playing field that they're on. But if the rules aren't there, they just go off and unfettered to do certain things. And we've heard there from the experts about these rules come in before the technology gets there. So I think that what we're seeing today, what the politicians are looking at here, it's going to be happening globally. It's not going to be the end of the story. And hopefully we will end up with a regulation whereby if you pursue growth, you can do it in a safe way.
Helen Thomas, CEO of Blonde Money, James Balls, tech specialist, and Imran Ahmed, CEO for the Centre for Countering Digital Hate. That's a discussion that's going to go on and on.
After the break, we'll be talking about the Chancellor's plan in the upcoming budget to provide a £500 million childcare support package. But just before that, it's time for your weather.
Hello. A bright and breezy day for many of us. There'll be some decent sunny spells, but also quite frequent showers pushing in from the west. Even some thunderstorms around, because these showers will be very lively, quite an unstable air mass across the UK at the moment, coming from the west behind this weather front, low pressure to the north of the UK. Tightly packed isobars, so a breezy day to come. The breeze pushing the remaining cloud out of the way from East Anglia and the southeast, but soon enough, showers follow in from the west. Frequent downpours in the west especially, but just about anywhere could catch these showers. And where they do occur, there'll be some gusty winds and even some thunderstorms with some small hail in places. Nevertheless, a mild day to come, 17 or 16 in the south, 10 or 11 further north, and that's where the strongest breeze will be. The showers quickly die away, actually, after the sun goes down in many places, but they'll continue around western shores, perhaps the odd one coming close to the south coast. Then later in the night, the cloud thickens in the west, and it turns wet across western Scotland and Northern Ireland. That'll keep temperatures up at 8 or 9 Celsius, dipping to 5 or 6 in the east of England, where at least we do have some sunshine to begin things on Tuesday. And we keep that sunshine for much of the morning, but the cloud thickens elsewhere and spells of rain move across Scotland, Northern England, into parts of Wales. Some light and patchy drizzle further south, but actually it does dry up a little into the afternoon, although a lot of places stay cloudy. There'll be further outbreaks of rain in the northwest of Scotland, and it's going to be a mild day with this strong southwesterly breeze reaching gale force around northern and northwestern shores. Further spells of rain into the northwest of Scotland on Tuesday night, a lot of cloud elsewhere. And this wet weather sticks around for a time, I think, through Wednesday and into Thursday in the northwest. Increasingly focused, though, on Cumbria around the mid to latter part of this week. And it's going to be mild everywhere.
Good afternoon. You're watching Piero and Halligan with me, Gloria Piero, and him, Liam Halligan.
Now, Chancellor Rishi Sunak is expected to give £500 million to childcare and early years support in his budget and spending review this week. What do you think of that? Because that strikes me as, you know, the Labour introduced Sure Start, which is very popular among lots of young families, particularly young mums. There was a kind of sense that, oh, it's a middle class thing, but that's not actually true, because often in lower income areas it was important too. Do you think the Tories are now reversing the previous reversal of Sure Start?
Well, it depends how significant, how many Sure Start centres there are going to be. Sorry, not Sure Start centres, early learning hubs. Not to be confused with Sure Start centres, which, as you said, the Labour Party introduced. But I did think when I was reading the briefing about this, the one-stop shop for support and advice for young mums, I did think, my goodness, that sounds very familiar to Sure Start centres. Now, the Labour Party say that the government, since 2010, they closed 1,000 Sure Start centres. So I am certain that they will say, whatever, £500 million,
it's a lot of money.
Notable than it is, it doesn't sound to me like it's going to staff and create 1,000 Sure Start centres, which Labour say
but triple-digit number of new centres, in the hundreds, you'd
Listen,
think,
I
for
think,
500 million.
do you know, sometimes, wouldn't it be nice, Liam, if you heard, like, a politician say, of either party, do you know what, maybe we shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice? It'd be almost, I think it would be more welcome and applauded when they said that, and people say, "Oh gosh, they said they were good. They said they regretted not keeping lots of them, and now they're bringing some back. Let's give them a go."
In the last hour, I did just briefly. I did my show on: is there going to be, you know, there is obviously going to be lots more money for the NHS given the waiting list, but is money always the answer? And do we need some reform? Now, even people like me who would always say, of course we need free at the point of use. I'm proud of free at the point of use. I know you're proud of the free at the point of use. But anyone who suggests, if I can keep my dentures in, if anyone...
They're real teeth. I can confirm.
Anyone who says maybe we can do the NHS a bit differently. You're instantly dismissed. Oh, you want to privatise it. Oh, you don't care about
But free at the point of view, you have to have it free at the point of view.
Absolutely, of course. I say it every single time. Yeah. But I still think there are different ways to reorganise the NHS.
You see, it's interesting that you say that, because, of course, you're right. Rationally, that sounds right. But I do remember...
Sounds right.
No, it sounds right. So do you remember when John Major introduced the private finance initiative for hospital building? And Labour kept it, they expanded
Massively
it.
expanded.
And I have to say that in my hospital in Ashfield, the amount of money that the taxpayer was paying back for that. Huge. So it sounds simple in practice. Who cares who funds it as long as it's free at the point of views? But the experience of PFI, that private finance initiative, it stung me a bit.
Agree more.
Really?
The NHS is still paying for those PFI contracts, which were woefully bad value for taxpayers' money. Right, we've solved that. Gosh, we agree on something. My God. Now, from today, London's ultra-low emission zone is expanding and will cover a quarter of the capital.
This means that if you have an older petrol or diesel car, you'll have to pay £12.50 a day to drive it into the zone for London. Sadiq Khan says the scheme will clean up London's toxic air pollution and hopes that people will sell their older cars for greener vehicles.
But critics say that most of the money for the scrappage schemes has gone, and over half of motorists in London recently surveyed said they didn't know anything about the expansion of the ULEZ zone, which, by the way, is the area inside but not including the north and south circular roads. Our London reporter Alice Porter spoke to the Mayor of London earlier.
Thousands of motorists who have applied for the scrappage scheme have either had their application rejected or suspended. Some of these are drivers who are sort of worthy of your scrappage scheme. Are you concerned that many motorists will be missing out?
Yeah, if somebody's applied for the scheme and been rejected, they can appeal. One of the things that I've done last week, I discovered an example where somebody was wrongfully rejected on more than one occasion. They, in the end, appealed successfully. I've asked TfL to make sure all those applications that were rejected are just checked again to make sure no mistake has been made. I'm quite clear, though, that these policies are about addressing the twin challenges of air pollution and the climate emergency. The good news is that we know from the ultra-low emission zone from central London that as a consequence of our policies, the quality of air in London has improved by 50%, but also the numbers of compliant vehicles has gone up, non-compliant vehicles gone down, and more Londoners who can are walking, cycling and using public transport, and where they can't, they're using a compliant vehicle.
A survey showed last week that more than half of Londoners don't know that the ultra-low emission zone is being expanded today. I spoke to one man at the weekend who only found out 2 weeks ago when a letter came through his door. He's got a van that's not compliant. Has the message just not got through to enough Londoners?
Well, when I stood for election in 2016, I was talking about this. In 2017, I made an announcement setting out the dates of this when it would happen. In 2019, the ultra-low emission zone began in central London. In 2021, when I ran for mayor again, this was on the ballot paper. As far as I was concerned, there's been a huge amount of publicity in advance of today, in addition to viewers like yours receiving a letter from DVLA. There's been more than 20 million people ringing up our vehicle checker. We've emailed millions of people who are registered with the ultra emission zone and the C charge. We've also been doing massive marketing and adverts on radio and on TV. It's really important we do what we can to make sure people are aware of this scheme. I've been doing media on a regular basis in relation to this scheme. We're quite clear. We've got to address the issue of air pollution now, not kick this can down the road.
Obviously, your aim is for people not to be spending the £12.50 a day and you want them to be changing their vehicles. But isn't it the reality that there still isn't quite the infrastructure, particularly when it comes to electric vehicles in London, that many people would struggle if they did have an electric car when it came to charging points?
What we do know is that in London, we have more than 7,000 charging points. That's more than a third of the country's charging network. We've got more than 300 rapid charging points, more than any city in Western Europe. We've got to increase the numbers of charging points and rapid charging points. At the moment, we can meet the demand, but as people move over to electric vehicles, there'll be a need for more electric charging points, more rapid charging points. The good news is, as more and more people are ordering electric vehicles, manufacturers are investing in technology, and so the battery capability is improving more. But I think we do have to think about the whole infrastructure across the country. For example, how do we provide the electricity that people use? It should be renewable, and so it's really important as a country we invest in infrastructure.
A quarter of London is now in the ULEZ zone. Will that be expanding further? What next?
Well, the numbers of Londoners in the ULEZ zone is almost 4 million. That's double the size of Paris, 8 times the size of Manchester, because I think this is an issue where all of Londoners should see the benefits of clean air, not just those lucky to live in central London as a consequence of our first policy in 2019. The key thing is to address the issue of air pollution. So we're doing a number of things to solve the issue of air pollution. The ultra-low emission zone is one of them. All our buses are ULEZ compliant, but also we've got a record number of electric buses. We now have record numbers of taxis that are electric. We're also doing things to make sure our buildings don't emit toxicity in relation to emissions and so forth. So we've got to make sure we continue to make progress in relation to the twin challenges of air pollution and climate emergency.
And finally, we've seen Insulate Britain on the streets of London today by Limehouse Causeway. How concerned are you about these protests, and do you think the police are doing enough to stop them?
Well, I'm concerned about some of the tactics used by these protesters. They're unlawful, they're dangerous, and they're often not peaceful as well. It's really important for those who feel strongly about this. I feel strongly about this. I feel strongly about the climate emergency and air pollution, to take people with us. And what these protesters are doing is not only risking their own safety, risking the safety of others, but driving people away from an important issue. The police have made a number of arrests today. They'll continue to do so where people break the law.
Alice Porter there talking to London Mayor Sadiq Khan. After the break, we'll be meeting the director of Steel UK, Gareth Stace. He speaks for an industry that still employs 30,000 British workers. Here's a sneak peek of what's to come.
You know, I'm hugely encouraged by the Prime Minister in his conference speech only a few weeks ago, saying that he wants to level up and he wants a high-wage economy. And I wish I was in the audience. I would have stood up and said, well, you've got it. We're the steel sector. That's exactly what we do.
That's coming up right after your news with Amelia Harper.
I'm Amelia Harper. Here are your latest headlines. The national living wage is set to rise to £9.50 an hour. Ahead of the Chancellor's budget this week, the Treasury has confirmed the increase from £8.91 for all over 23s. From April the 1st next year, the 59p hourly boost will mean a full-time worker on the living wage will get a pay rise of over £1,000 a year. Elsewhere in the budget, £5.9 billion will also be made available to help tackle NHS backlogs. The average UK petrol price has reached an all-time high at 142.94 pence a litre. On Sunday, prices beat records set in April 2012 by 0.46 pence. Meanwhile, diesel prices reached 146.5 pence a litre. The RAC is calling it a dark day for drivers that will hurt many household budgets. Scotland's First Minister says the COP26 Global Climate Conference in Glasgow could be the last opportunity to avert a climate catastrophe. Nicola Sturgeon says Scotland is in a unique position to bridge the gaps in conversation between world leaders. Elsewhere at the Downing Street press conference for children, the Prime Minister has been speaking about that climate conference. Boris Johnson says meeting the goals of COP26 would be very, very difficult, but he says, I think it can be done. In other news, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, says the government is heading towards legislating mandatory COVID vaccines for all NHS staff. A member of the Joint Committee of Vaccination and Immunisation is also urging NHS workers to get double jabbed as a matter of professional pride. 52 people have been arrested after Insulate Britain brought London's financial district to a standstill today. Protesters disrupted rush hour traffic in the City of London and Canary Wharf. Injunctions have already been filed against some protesters after they caused delays on the M25 and other major roads during 5 weeks of action. A spokesperson says they will continue until the government gives a meaningful statement they can trust. I'll have a full update for you on all of today's main stories at the top of the hour.
House of Commons, where former Facebook employee Frances Haugen is giving evidence.
Imposing unrealistic, outdated housing numbers on us.
Sir Uste. I absolutely. Still, I know. It's still something of a surprise to me, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what it's like for you. But anyway, I completely understand the unique issues faced by her constituents. The unique geography of the peninsula and the communities that she represents poses particular challenges when it comes not just to meeting local housing needs, but also respecting the environment and indeed the nature of the communities and their special cherishable character. And as we take forward our proposals for planning reform, we'll be balancing...
So that was actually Michael Gove, wasn't it, in the first Levelling Up questions. They're every month, these parliamentary questions to the Secretary of State, but since he's been in that post, it's the first time that newly created department has been created.
We are just trying to get that coverage from the House of Commons committee where Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen is giving testimony. We're going to try and get that to you very, very soon. That's just after a short break. Well, we'll soon be going live to the House of Commons to hear the former Facebook employee Frances Haugen, who's giving evidence to MPs. It strikes me, as Helen Thomas says, Gloria, the CEO of Blonde Money, who was here earlier, this is a pretty big moment, and the first of what will be many big moments as our legislators, not only in the UK but across the world, attempt really to catch up with the pace of change and technological progress and developments among Facebook, Google and the other tech giants.
Yes, indeed, and actually 50 Conservative MPs have written a letter today calling for action. You might automatically assume a Conservative government would be hands-off, light-touch regulation, but it seems the time is coming for action on those social media companies. The main point at Prime Minister's Question Time last Wednesday, actually, was when the Labour leader said at Prime Minister's Question Time that it was time for criminal sanctions.
It's really interesting because this is not a Labour Conservative, pro-business, anti-business thing. An awful lot of very, very pro-business Conservatives who I know and you know feel that the tech giants do need to be reined in. Of course, they deny any criminal wrongdoing, any wrongdoing whatsoever. But I think when you've got tech giants taking MPs' speeches off the internet, then it is going to provoke a reaction, isn't it?
It's true, but also it has to be borne in mind, and I'm guessing this is what the social media companies would say today, is that there was terrorism before social media. There was hate before social media. MPs were murdered before social media. So that's just important to put that into context as the social media companies.
We will stay with that story. It's a huge part of what we're trying to do here on GB News to cover these developments. Now, you're watching Piero and Halligan. It's now time for my daily interview series, Money Talks. Now, 7.3 million tonnes of steel are produced in the UK each year, which is around 65% of the UK's annual requirement. We import lots of steel, and for every 1,000 tonnes produced in the UK, that brings around £1 million to the economy. Well, I interviewed Gareth Stace ahead of the budget. He's the director of UK Steel, which is the trade association for our steel industry. All the country's steel makers and the majority of downstream producers are members. He's got over 15 years of experience in shaping and influencing policy at the European and British level, and here's what he had to say. Good to see you, Gareth. The UK steel industry employs over 30,000 people in the UK still, but we only produce 7 million tonnes a year in a normal year. They produce 40 million a year in Germany and over 950 million in China. Why is that?
The headline news here would be that we don't have an industrial strategy in the UK. Historically, governments of all shades of colour don't set a competitive business environment for foundation sectors like steel really to flourish. And you see that in droves in Germany. They make sure that their energy prices, for example, are really competitive and much lower than ours. And that's what we need here. You know, we're a small country that's just come out of the EU. We've got a chance to furrow our own destiny here and have a vision. And that vision could be to have sectors like steel that produce materials like paper and glass and ceramics and steel that go into a really strong and vibrant manufacturing sector. But we haven't had that. And we don't have any indication that this government wants to do that. We do see the Prime Minister talk about high wage economy and levelling up, and that really would involve steel, but we don't see any detail of that. And we need to before, I think it's too late, before that 7 million tonnes becomes 6, becomes 5, becomes 4, and then we just see us as a sector withering on the vine. And this is the country where they invented how you make steel.
How seriously is the steel industry being hit by the 200, 300, 400% rise we've seen in wholesale gas prices? You're obviously a very energy-intensive sector. There's no cap for commercial users of gas and energy as there is for households. What's it doing to the companies that make up your membership?
Completely and utterly turning it on its head. Some steel companies have said to me, we feel like we're actually becoming energy price risk managers, not steel makers, because the price is fluctuating so wildly. As you said, Liam, it's gone up so much. It's gone up 10 times since it was last year. But the crucial thing for us here, you know, if everyone was in the same boat, you know, sometimes ministers say, oh, this is a global problem. And whilst it is a global problem, we feel it much more here in the UK. So, for example, last Thursday, we looked at spot prices, and spot prices in the UK were 3 times higher than they were in Germany. But we are also seeing those real crazy spikes in electricity prices in weird times of the day, which means when our members, when the steel producers in the UK see these, they stop production. Now, you can stop production for a little bit here, a little bit there, a few times a week, and that's probably fine. But if you keep stopping production, you not only produce less steel, but your environmental emissions go up, your carbon emissions go up, your kit that you're using to make that steel breaks quickly because it's designed to be used at full pelt, and so it's not good news. But you know, even on Friday night when energy prices, electricity prices on that spot market should be low, they were above £1,000 a megawatt hour. hour, which, you know, if you think of at home, you'll be paying kilowatt hours. That's above £1 a kilowatt hour, which is just incredible. You'd be turning your TVs off if the price of electricity at home was at that price.
It's true to say, though, isn't it, Gareth, that long before this current energy crisis, UK steelmakers have paid far more for their energy than other countries in the EU. Why is that?
And indeed they have, you know, for over 10 years. We've been saying to government, and again, of all colours, not just this Conservative administration, we seem to be paying more for electricity. So 5 years ago, because governments were not listening to us every year, telling them that this was making us uncompetitive, it was tying our hands behind our backs in terms of the ability to make steel and trade it on the global market, we produced an annual report that we set out this price differential, this price disparity between us and Germany and France. It's always Germany and France we look at so we can see the progression of this. And why is it? Well, it's because of government policy. Government decides that someone's got to pay for transmission charges, capacity charges, carbon charges, renewable charges, all of those charges, and they pile them onto very large energy users like the steel sector. So yes, that's why we see that massive difference between us and Germany. In that report, we set out what that difference is, how uncompetitive it makes us, why those prices are so different, and crucially, we say to government, this is how you could change that, this is how you could solve it, and we set that out in quite some detail, because we wouldn't want government to say, well, it's just too difficult, because it isn't. Every solution that we come up with is a solution that's been tried and tested somewhere in Europe. It doesn't go against WTO rules or state aids, etc. They're all tried and tested methods. And every year we pass this publication to government, and every year whoever's in the Department for Business or in Treasury at the time say, thank you very much. Yes, that's not very good, is it? Oh, it must be very difficult for you. We must look at this. And they do nothing. The last time anyone did anything on this was in 2016.
The government's net zero agenda, how is it impacting the steel industry? Is it making your members less competitive? Is it translating into higher energy prices? And a big part of your cost base is the price of energy, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. So two things. One, if you think of the price of carbon, that's at its kind of highest level at the moment, so we're paying that. But I'd like to flip this around and say, net zero carbon, we're a highly carbon-intensive sector, but we make steel. And when you think of steel as a material, in a modern society such as the UK, everything is either made of steel or made using steel. When we move, as we move further to a net zero carbon world in the UK, this country will not be using less steel, it will be using more steel. All the government scenarios of how we're going to get to net zero carbon in 2040 or 2050 all use more steel. Therefore, what should we do? Should we?
Because they're using wind turbines, they're using solar, they're using all kinds of renewables, all of which use lots of steel.
Yeah, and really high-tech steel as well, you know, lightweighting for automobiles, etc. So exactly, Liam. And therefore, what do we do? Do we just import all that steel? Or does this government say, right, actually, to get to net zero carbon, do we take control of our own responsibilities in terms of the carbon emissions? And therefore, do we make more steel in the UK? You'd said earlier, we produce 7 million tonnes of steel in the UK. We consume 13 million tonnes of steel. So there's so much more that we should be making rather than importing halfway across the world with all those carbon emissions and relinquishing our carbon responsibilities to somewhere else. And we just kind of think, oh, it's not our problem. It is our problem, and we should be making that steel here.
So we already consume almost twice the amount of steel that we make. We consume 13 million tonnes, and we make only 7 million tonnes. So how can the government change that outcome? How can the government help you and your members to produce more steel?
It's really simple. Just give us a better, competitive business environment to work in that we don't have at the moment. So I've talked about electricity, and I hope we can talk about that more because that's our key issue at the moment. But even on business rates, the business rate system in the UK for capital-intensive sector like steel is crazy. So I'm a steel producer. I could say I want to buy a new piece of kit that might cost me £100 million, say, for example. When I do that, and buy it, and it makes me more efficient. I can employ more people because I'm better competing in the market. My business rate bill goes up.
And it goes up every year, forever.
Because they take into account all of the new, more efficient machinery that you're buying to replace the old stuff, and therefore you're adding to the UK economy, but your business rate bill goes up. On procurement, the government is the biggest purchaser of steel in the UK. They buy 1 million tonnes a year. Do they buy it from the UK, or do they just buy it from somewhere? They just buy it from somewhere. If you ask them, these days they do know, but about 4 years ago, we asked government, do you buy it from the UK? Do you buy it elsewhere? No government department knew what proportion of the steel that they purchase in all the major projects, infrastructure projects, etc., came from the UK. They know now, but it's still under 50%. Now, we're not saying buy British. What we're saying is don't just look at the price of steel or let the tier 1 or tier 2 contractors just go off and buy the steel from wherever. And just think about value. So it's value of where that steel's produced. Is it produced in the UK? How many people does it employ? Are the carbon emissions lower? Are the transport emissions lower? Will it employ even more people in the UK if we buy that steel from there? All of those things are not considered. And it should be. And then we would be purchasing more steel from the UK. And then more of that 1 million tonnes a year that the government buys, we could be producing for them.
Hang on. Gareth, I remember when Boris Johnson stood at the dispatch box in the House of Commons explaining to lots of backbenchers who didn't want HS2 to go ahead that HS2 was in fact going ahead. One of the sweeteners, he said, was, of course, we'll be buying British steel. We'll be by prioritising steel made here in the UK because, of course, Europe's biggest infrastructure project, a massive, stonking great railway, uses lots of steel. Is that happening?
In short, no. And I'll tell you why, because they have procurement guidelines. There is government procurement guidelines, and HS2 could follow every single one and tick all the boxes and still buy 0% of steel from the UK. It won't. All the track, presumably like 97% of the track it'll buy from the UK, but the bridges, the gantries, the stations, I hope that they engage with steel producers in the UK. But it's more of a hope than knowing they will. That's the key issue. It's letting us know as a sector, in 5 years' time, we will need this amount of steel. It needs to be this grade. It needs to be delivered there. If we have that sort of information, then steel companies in the UK, whether they're big or they're much smaller, can plan for that, can work with those contractors or work with those big projects, and then deliver that steel and that value to those projects.
Let's go back to the electricity price. Are you saying that the government should cap the electricity price for commercial users as it caps the electricity price for domestic users?
So ideally, yes, but I think there's a massive cost to that. So let's be reasonable and pragmatic here. When we look at the wholesale prices, that's what's killing us at the moment. Because those wholesale prices, you'd think, wholesale price, they'd be the same in Germany as they are in the UK. No, they're not. That's what I was saying in terms of they are 3 times in the UK than they are in Germany. So what we're looking for is the government temporarily, I hope temporarily, just to soften that blow, bring us down to what basically are our direct competitors in France, Germany, Spain, and let's say Turkey. I mean, they're a big competitor, but I think their prices are even less for energy. And give us that boost now, because if this crazy prices, if they continue, which, when I'm speaking to a steel company today, tell me that even into Q1, those forward prices are about the same as we're seeing now. So it's not going to go anytime soon when we do hear government ministers saying, don't you worry, by the new year it'll all be fine.
That's not what the markets are saying.
No.
We can see forward markets. You can buy now, as in any sophisticated financial market, you can buy now for delivery in the future. You're saying that prices for delivery in January are pretty much where they are today, or certainly elevated compared to normality.
Yeah, they're broadly the same, yeah. And
Wow.
Next summer, they come down a bit, next summer. So if things continue, government doesn't help, government doesn't bridge that gap between us and our continental European competitors, then it's going to become more and more unsustainable to make steel in the UK. And, at some point, and I couldn't say when, and I don't want to be crying wolf. The government always accuses us of crying wolf. I don't want to cry wolf, but I think I know it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out if you're uncompetitive, that you're pausing production, that you're losing market share, that you're coming out of certain products because they're either highly electro-intensive or they're less value-added, so to speak. If you're doing all of that, when a business is unsustainable, it is unsustainable and you don't carry on.
And I think I'm right in saying, Gareth, that for steelmakers, energy is generally between a fifth and a quarter of their costs, right? It's a big chunk.
Yeah, in normal times.
Yeah.
So now, what is it? So for an electric arc furnace producer, where they take scrap steel, they stick it in a massive bucket that's the size of a house and they stick 2 electrodes in it, and that uses half as much electricity as a city like Cardiff, literally that much. Electricity prices as they are now doubling. They're doubling the cost of you making steel. So you just price out of the market. That's the problem. You know, you talked about we use a lot of energy. We use as much gas as 400,000 homes. We use as much electricity as 850,000 homes. It's a huge amount. So any time the energy prices change for us, it's a massive impact.
Over half the steel in the world now is made in China. China makes 142 times more steel than we do. Is that a problem?
Yes, it can be a massive problem. It's almost like that when China sneezes, we catch a cold. So China at the moment, its economy is running okay. So all of that steel that it's making, as you said, over half the world's steel, it's using itself. It's also actually importing more steel at the moment. But all you need is just a few 0.1% of its economy to go down a bit, and suddenly they've got a surplus of, well, I remember in 2015, 2016, it had a surplus of 100 million tonnes of steel, and it exported it.
That hits world markets, prices collapse, high-cost steelmakers like hit us in the UK, we get mullered by that, right?
Totally and utterly, because it doesn't matter what it sells it for, and it can flood. And steel travels across the world quickly. And actually 43% or 40% of all steel produced travels across borders. We are a truly global market in steel. The price is set globally. You can lose a deal on £5 a tonne of steel. So when we're talking about the energy prices we just said, therefore, we can lose orders at the moment, left, right and centre. And as I said, Turkey come into our market within a matter of weeks. And it's easy to come into our market because you have steel grades, and therefore, traders, importers can just come straight in here and we can be substituted, and it's easy to lose market share, very, very difficult to get it back.
So that was Gareth Stace, the Director of UK Steel, and you can listen to the full 25-minute version of that conversation.
Yes,
another similar debates with major players in the world of business and finance on my Money Talks podcast, on the GB News YouTube channel, or via any decent podcast platform.
You're watching Piero and Halligan on GB News. We're back tomorrow at 2 for more budget build-up. Up next, it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey.
Hello. A bright and breezy day for many of us. There'll be some decent sunny spells, but also quite frequent showers pushing in from the west. Even some thunderstorms around, because these showers will be very lively. Quite an unstable air mass across the UK at the moment, coming from the west behind this weather front. Low pressure to the north of the UK. Tightly packed isobars, so a breezy day to come. The breeze pushing the remaining cloud out of the way from East Anglia and the southeast, but soon enough, showers follow in from the west. Frequent downpours in the west especially, but just about anywhere could catch these showers. And where they do occur, there'll be some gusty winds and even some thunderstorms with some small hail in places. Nevertheless, a mild day to come, 17 or 16 in the south.